You want to get started?
Let's do it.
All right, awesome. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Danae. I'm the communications manager here at the Greene Center, and we're joined with Joe Testani, our executive director. Just to give you the lay of the land a little bit, how we're asking that we move forward with today's AMA is that if you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A section, and then myself and Joe will go through the questions and we'll go from there and start answering them. And please note you are on mute, so if you could remain on mute, that'd be awesome. All right, Joe, you want to jump into the first one?
I think so. How's your week going so far, Danae?
It's good. I can't believe it's Wednesday already.
I know. I'm excited to be here, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions. And Danae will talk about some other ways to get information from our team later at the end of our AMA. So thanks for joining us.
All right. Okay. So, Joe, how does this crisis impact job search for seniors, and what can we do to be proactive about this?
It's a good question. I think it's going to impact in a variety of ways. I think for those students that already had job offers, I think there's a waiting game that's at play right now about when those jobs might start. So many organizations are not they're not rescinding full-time offers in certain industry sectors, at least what we've heard so far. That some of them are pushing back start dates, some are pushing back onboarding or moving onboarding to virtual. These are some of the trends that we're seeing. There are some offers that have been rescinded, and I think that has largely to do with those industry sectors that might be most severely impacted. So obviously anything in tourism or hospitality industries for sure. And then other sectors as well. I think this is a fluid situation. And so there's a lot of movement that's happening. For those students that are in the midst of their job search or were in the beginning of their job search when this hit, I think there's a lot of dust to settle still. And I think we're monitoring how the pandemic is impacting different parts of the world, as well as different parts of industries. So certain industries are going to be growing, others may be contracting, others are going to be on hold. So there's a lot of factors that are still at play. So I think the number one thing that students can really think about is how do they remain adaptable in the situation? In our office, in the Greene Center, as well as other parts of campus, we talk a lot about life design as sort of a foundational way of engaging around career education and students and thinking about their careers. And one of the key pieces of that is staying curious, but also sort of adapting to change that might be in front of them. So I think the important thing here is how can you pivot? Can you remain resilient? I think these are lessons for sure that we heard from 2008, 2009 from seniors that were graduating at that time frame or alumni that were impacted by this. So that's going to be a critical part of this equation, is pivoting to new opportunities, new ways to apply their education in different sectors that they might not have anticipated before. And I think that's where our advisors on our team, as well as faculty mentors, alumni mentors, these people are going to be really critical to help find where are those areas that seniors may be able to apply some of their education and their interests and their experiences. But I think it's going to be really varied from industry to industry. I think that's something that is going to be interesting as it unfolds, whether it's the nonprofit, social good sector, to the pharmaceutical sector, to finance and banking. I think we're going to see different fluctuations of how this might impact sectors. So there's no sort of good answer for that. I think applies to all industries, but I think adaptability is going to be at the central piece of this for seniors in terms of how they're able to navigate this landscape.
Sure. Okay. So when you're talking about the different industries and how they're being impacted right now, do you have any thoughts on industries that might experience an uptick during this because of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, so what we've seen so far, and I think this is sort of over the first month and change of this as it's impacted the United States, anything having to do with teleworking or sort of that sort of sphere. So think Zoom, Slack, any organizations that are offering services or products that are related to people being able to work from home remotely more effectively. But there's also been a boom of like different lifestyle activities as well. So many of you might have taken yoga online, or you might have continued to participate in different social activities online. And so, or playing games together as bringing people together. So there's some sectors that are growing because they're responding to the needs that people have in our current state. Other areas such as like grocery store chains and deliveries, more people are relying on that. And there's obviously a sustainability, sort of environmental impact on that as well that I think we have to be conscious of or be aware of. But I think those are sectors that are growing in terms of working in warehouses and delivery systems and Amazon and Walmarts and things like that. I think another big sector, I think, is around the pharmaceutical biotech. I think anything related to supporting the fight against COVID-19, I think they're seeing an increase in activity. So pharmaceutical companies searching for developing vaccines, organizations that are producing materials, equipment and safety supplies for doctors and nurses and the people on the front line, I think are going to be critical. So we're seeing sort of upticks in some of those areas, as well as some other sectors that might be impacted. And that's going to evolve, I think, as we start to see how long this might last. I think there might be other sectors that present themselves. I think the social good sector, how do we serve and support our communities? We're seeing a big push for food banks and finding food insecurity and figuring out how to solve that. Obviously, there's a lot of donations going in there, but what's going to be the result or the long-term impact of that after some of the dust settles and we start to relax some of the social distancing. So I think those are some industry sectors, Danae, that I think have come up for sure when we think about the impact of sort of positive upticks in some of those industry sectors.
Absolutely. Thank you for your insight on that.
No problem.
So we have a question coming in about how does the pandemic affect international students' ability to secure jobs?
I think it's a great question. And I think this is a complicated one as well. We've been working really closely with the International Student Office here at the university. They've done a phenomenal job at monitoring what some of the impact is. I think this is going to vary from country to country depending on what the situations are in those countries and if they're able to process visas. If you're going back to those countries or traveling around the world, our country, obviously, with Homeland Security, there might be lag times in processing optional practical training, OPT. So I think the number one thing for students to be able to do or should be doing is making sure that they're aligned with ISO in terms of what is currently going on and what delays might exist in terms of some of the securing opportunities and what the legalities are around that. I think that's a critical piece of this because obviously we want students to remain in the country legally and obviously be protected. But that's an ever-changing dynamic. So ISO is very much on the front lines of figuring that out, paying attention to what's trending there, paying attention to timeframes that might be impacting really the technical part of finding a job in the States in particular around securing visa authorizations or work authorizations. I think in terms of the general job search, I don't think necessarily much has changed outside of the challenges or stalling around OPT or CPT processing and that sort of thing. I think the industries that are still hiring or favorable to international students remain that way. And obviously, that was constricting before in the last few years with our current administration. I think it became a little harder for international students to find opportunities in the States, and that hasn't necessarily changed. So I think the delays around paperwork and processing, I think, are the biggest challenge that might be facing our international students. And I think that we need to be really in close lockstep with ISO and our team to figure out how that might impact individual students, and it might impact also where they are right now. So if they're home in their country and trying to return to the States, if they're in the United States and trying to obtain employment, those are going to really factor into some of those decision making because of travel restrictions that might exist and not knowing when those might be lifted for certain countries and students. The last thing I'll say about that is if there's offers in hand already for students in terms of virtual work or jobs, I think it's really important to connect with your employer and find out what recommendations or what sort of processes they're putting in place within the organizations themselves. So that might vary from company to company in their ability to support students in their transition to the workplace. So that those are, I think, some of the factors. And I think there's so much dependent upon individual cases that I think is really important. But I think between our office, ISO, the student, I think we can at least identify solutions and look to see what the best course of action may be.
Okay, thank you, Joe. That's a really good tip right there. We have one coming in asking about, so this individual has a lease in Boston, but their job was canceled. What is a good approach when looking for a job now? They graduate in July.
Graduating in July.
Mm-hmm.
I think the important thing here for people that may have had jobs offers rescinded is really thinking about taking a step back for a moment and thinking, okay, what exactly are my goals? What did I want to do? What's the opportunity that I had, maybe that I lost? And what am I willing and open to be doing that might be either closely associated with my career path or the jobs that I want, or that might be maybe a further sort of step apart from that. So I think it's really important to kind of take stock of the situation. I think last week someone asked about like, should you take the first job that comes open, or should we like kind of take whatever's available? And I think that might depend on your situation and what your willingness is to do. But I don't think that's necessarily as a bad thing. We don't know where this recession is going to take us. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know how unstable the economy might be. And I think it's very different than 10 years ago or 12 years ago or 20 years ago. The rate of change that people have jobs is very different. People can switch jobs, and I don't think it's looked upon as badly as it was 15 years ago in terms of leaving jobs and moving up a ladder in terms of career pathing. So if you were to take a job, you're probably looking at something maybe you're doing for a year or so that might then allow you to go to graduate school, might turn into a different kind of position or career path. So I think it's important to kind of contextualize it in the longer term versus sort of what's immediately in front of you. But I think it's important to sort of cast a wider net, open the interest areas, open the possibilities of what you might consider. Think about industry sectors that might need more talent right now that you can maybe lend your skill set to, depending on where you're coming from and your background, your experiences that you've had. But I think one of the other tenets of our life design approach is talking to people. And I think it's really important now more than ever is to tap into the U of R community, tap into the U of R network, alumni, faculty, staff, people that are very much willing to help out, because I think that's a hallmark of our U of R community is that I think we're wanting to help each other. And I think this is definitely a time where we can do that. I've had a lot of alumni ask me, how can they help? How can they give back to the institution in this really critical time? And I think the number one thing I always say is make sure you're available to students, make sure you're available to each other so that we can lean into our community to identify new opportunities.
Okay, you know what was interesting? When I was checking the registrations for this webinar today, I realized that there is quite a bit of interest in wanting to get your thoughts on what you think might happen in the fall in regards to job search. Do you have any insight or thoughts to that?
Yeah, I think it's something that we've already started thinking about in our office and really across campus. There's a number of leaders around campus that serve the graduate programs here at the university, and we've gotten together to think about what does the fall look like? How is this maybe permanently transformed how recruiting is done? What does the fall look like just for higher ed in general? And so I think there's things that we're monitoring. So for example, if we're not able to go back to a traditional interaction experience like a career fair, what's the alternative option that we might provide students? So if because of social distancing, we don't offer the career fair in the fall, we're going to look at virtual career fair options. We're going to look at maybe smaller, more intimate or one-on-one experiences that students can connect with alumni or employers for recruiting purposes. I think those types of experiences may have to evolve. And so we're already thinking and anticipating that is a very real scenario that we should be sort of evaluating and start to build for ourselves for the fall. So I think that in terms of the disruption to the normal kind of recruiting experiences, people coming on campus to interview, people coming to campus to recruit, us taking students to different locations around the country, those might not necessarily be options for us because of travel restrictions or because encouragement to continue social distancing. So what are the virtual options that might be available that allow us to experience the same kind of engagement? between students and employers and students and alumni. So that's definitely something we're paying attention to, and we've already started crafting alternative options. And I think that's something that we'd love student feedback in, how to do that effectively, because I think we want to retain some of that interaction that you might have, but also replacing it in safe ways that might be necessary in our state. The other thing around the job market itself, that's to be determined. I think that will largely depend on how long social distancing lasts, how long the economy continues to get disrupted because of people not being able to go to work, where unemployment rates continue to go, which industry sectors continue to be negatively impacted, which ones can survive and then kind of rebound in a really effective way. So those are all the factors, I think, that influence what might happen in the fall. But we, right now, in preliminary conversations, many organizations are anticipating a return to some form of hiring because they anticipate, okay, they'll kind of rebound, they'll look at their next year and look at the hiring classes for the following year. But that's optimistic, and I think I share that optimism. But not all sectors may feel that uniformly, and I think that's going to be the important thing for us to monitor and pay attention to. And we have a really great set of employers and alumni that are advisors to us to kind of guide us and also give us insight as to what's happening in different sectors, so that we can better prepare students and share that and communicate that back to students. I know one of the other things you're doing, Danae, is your mini podcast series. I don't know if you want to say something about that and how that might be helpful to give maybe some industry insights on different sectors.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to share some more about that. Basically, what we're doing in the Greene Center, we're having short 10 to 12-minute conversations with different alums from all different industries. And we're really trying to get their perspective from like a bird's eye view, right? Like what they're seeing in their industry, what sort of trends, or even how this is impacting their industry. And we're hoping to capture some of that information for you all, and also some advice they have for students who are hoping to join that industry in the future. So those are coming soon. We're in the process of recording a lot of them this week and next, and then we're hoping to get the first one up this week. So if you want to find out more information about that, you can visit our website, and it'll also be posted all over our social media.
Awesome.
Thanks, Joe, for the
Thank,
plug.
no problem.
Okay, so we do have a question from Megan. Hi, I'm a master's student in higher education administration, and many of the institutions I was looking at are on a hiring freeze right now. What is the best use of my time if there aren't many jobs to apply for? Is it appropriate to reach out to different departments for informational interviews?
Great question, Megan. This is also, I think, could be applied to a lot of our graduate students, many of our PhD students at U of R. The higher ed market specifically is taking a real big hit with a lot of what's happening right now. So I think there's going to be some contracting, there's going to be some hiring freezes potentially in the higher ed market. So I think the informational interview route is 100% a great way to approach that and to tackle that. And I think the important piece here is if you have an opportunity to get into a higher ed institution in a variety of roles, you might be more open now to take one of those roles in order to sort of make your entree into that organization. The other thing to think about is what's happening in the higher ed adjacent industry sectors. So right now, the whole ed tech sector is exploding. How do we support online education? How do we support alternative ways of learning? How are we solving the problem of education K-12 and higher ed? Because these disruptions that we're experiencing right now will most likely continue into the fall and may be permanent in some ways. So there's a lot of activity actually happening in that higher ed adjacent sector. So how do you apply some of your education and training to maybe support or influence or advise some of these ed tech companies that might be partnering with higher education institutions? Because I think we're going to see a lot more of that and a continuation of that. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing either. I think we can be more prepared as universities for these kinds of disruptions. So some of the permanence that we're learning right now might really impact higher ed for many years to come. So I think it's important to continue to network, communicate, engage with people that are working in the higher ed sector. Because I think there's going to be some challenges facing universities and colleges in terms of hiring. But I think you might also start to alter in a way some of the criteria that you put into your search. So you might think about, am I wed to a particular location? Am I open to other functional areas within the university? What's the growth potential? What are maybe family factors that are influencing some of your decision? So for PhD people that are going into or had aspirations to go into academia, for master's students like yourself that might have had interest in working in the student affairs side of things within a university, I think those are definitely factors to weigh in and important pieces to think about. But there's also higher and adjacent opportunities that might also be relevant that maybe you didn't consider before. So I think those are definitely some things to keep in mind.
Those are great tips. Thanks,
Thanks.
Joe.
Thank you.
Of course. So we have a question coming in from Gwen Green. Hi, Gwen. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, Gwen. How are you?
Gwen is asking, how will summer internships be affected?
Good question, Gwen, of course. So I think there's a few ways that we're seeing them being affected. I think now there's a bunch of decisions this week that have started to come to light, and we'll probably anticipate more information in the coming next couple of weeks. Some organizations have been able to move their internships completely virtual. So they've taken their whatever internships they've had, they've moved them to a virtual format. They've shortened them a little bit just because I think they need the extra time to build a virtual experience that might be very different than an in-person experience. Kudos to those organizations that have been able to do that. Really great opportunity for students. They're maintaining their commitment to students in thinking about how they can continue to support them, but just in a very different kind of environment. Other organizations are kind of waiting to figure out how the next few weeks will shake out, and that also might be dependent on where they are in the country and what their industry sector that they're in. So they're definitely waiting and seeing, or biding time to figure out how they can convert what they've done into a virtual format. Some industries may not lend themselves well to that, so I think that's something that they have to evaluate. Other organizations, unfortunately, have shut down their programs, rescinded offers, canceled their internship programs. Danae will share some resources that in the chat area of some trackers that we've been looking at and monitoring that have been developed over the last few weeks to let students know which programs have been canceled outright, which ones have moved to virtual, and who might still be looking for people or hiring. So there's some really cool resources that are out there for students that helps them kind of understand what the landscape is looking like. For those that have opportunities rescinded, and I think there was a question in the Q&A about, what's the alternative option for the summer? I'm happy to say that we have a work group right now that I'm part of here at the university to create some alternative options, and some students have already reached out to me, and I hope more do, about what else we can do in the summertime that might be like skill building activities. So how do you learn maybe certain software? How are you able to maybe develop certain skills that might be relevant to you working in labs or for graduate school or for potential jobs? So we're working on an inventory of online programs, courses, skill building activities that students will be able to participate in, and that we're able to offer and curate for the student population, both undergraduate and graduate students. So that's something that I'm really excited about, that we might be we'll be offering probably in the next couple of months to students. So if you have any interest, if you have any ideas, please reach out to me or Danae with those ideas, because we're at the process now of really ideating on this. And we're looking actually for student feedback on some of the concepts that we've come up with. At the end of the day, we want to be able to offer something that's an alternative to an internship or undergraduate research if those opportunities, unfortunately, have been rescinded or canceled due to social distancing needs, anything else obviously related to COVID. So I think those are some thoughts on what happens in the summer, what organizations are doing, as well as maybe what's the alternative that we can provide to students to continue to build skills and think about how they can continue to learn during the summer months.
For the students that are still in limbo and they don't know if their internships or experiences are going to go to remote, do you think it's appropriate for them to proactively suggest a remote version of their internship so that they can still gain these experiences, these skills, and make more connections in their field?
100%. I think two things those students should be doing. Number one, they should be actively looking for opportunities outside of whatever offer they have. I think it's reasonable. I don't think there's anything sort of unethical about that. if they are not sure if their offer will go through or if they're still waiting, I would encourage them to start applying for other opportunities, whatever might be out there. Handshake is we're working with Handshake, our online platform, to identify opportunities that are still actively hiring or employers that are still actively hiring. So there'll be some new features coming out in the next week or so for students to be able to search that a little more easily for those. But I definitely encourage students to continue to apply for opportunities that might sort of be active as an alternative. I think the other part of the second thing that I think students can do is think about the client or the organization that you have an internship with. If they haven't made a decision yet, how can you propose a virtual internship? So what's the problem that the organization is trying to solve? Who are the clients that the organization is serving? And I would be proactive and say, hey, I know you're struggling right now. I know there's challenges, but here's some ways I've thought of how I can help your organization serve your client, address the problems that you are normally addressing on a day-to-day basis. And here's how I can do that virtually. So I think one of the other hallmarks of U of R students, really, really, really great problem solvers. I think this is where you can take your problem solving skill set and apply it to these experiences and present options maybe to employers as to how your internship could be a virtual internship. Now, some of that's going to be still to be dependent on those organizations and payroll challenges or whatever it might be within the organization. But I think you proposing those ideas, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing at all. And I don't think there's a downside to you proactively thinking through how you can continue to help those organizations do their business and serve the constituents that they have. But it requires you to kind of put yourself in their position, empathize with what they're trying to do, what they might be going through, and think how you can contribute to helping them address the needs that they have. So I think the proactive approach to me is very much a great way to go to really kind of support the organization, and you're taking a little more control, obviously, of your experience as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, since obviously we're doing a lot of things that rely on the internet when we are remote, what about people who don't have the best internet connection? I know
Yeah.
even myself, like depending on the day, like it's pretty spotty. So, are there other kinds of remote work that don't require constant internet connection?
This is a really good question. I think, this has put a strain on a lot of people, not only their ability to stay connected via internet and online, because not all of us have resources to be able to do that effectively. So I think for those students, I encourage them to work with one of our advisors. We're available not only via Zoom, but for phone calls or whatever might be easiest for them to interact with, to figure out what those solutions might look like. So for example, there might be projects students can work on just on their laptops without internet connectivity. That might be like analyzing data or building designing different things or building PowerPoint decks or whatever it might be. And that requires them to maybe have limited internet connectivity so they could just email finished products or jump on a phone call to talk to their supervisors or organizations where they might be interning or working to provide them some of that information. So there's ways to do that. I think the frequency of engagement and interactivity, I think is a really good question to evaluate. So I think it is possible. That is largely dependent upon the kind of work as well as the industry sector and security and things like that. But I think it's possible. And I think if students are thinking creatively about ways they can do that and brainstorming with the advisors in our office or alumni mentors or each other, I find, U of R students to be really, I think, resilient in thinking about ideas. So I think leaning on each other to find ways forward, I think, is a really important piece of our community as well. So definitely possible. I think some factors that will impact that. But I think there's ways to navigate that if that really is a barrier for you.
Okay, so we have another question coming in asking, how has the pandemic affected the ability of research institutions like the U of R to fund student scholarships?
I think if we're talking about like academic scholarships of some kind, I think my easiest way to answer that is that the university is committed to maintaining what they've done for students and the commitment they've made to students, no matter what. I think that's an important piece that the university wants to sort of uphold. Many of the scholarships that the university offers, I think, are donor-based and typically are for some of them are for 4 years, others are year to year. So I think each student's going to have a little bit of a different case individually, and I think making sure you're checking with our financial aid officers can be critical. But I know that's one of those areas that the university is committed to. I think my experience with U of R is that they want to make sure students that are here can continue here, can finish their degrees here. And part of that for some students is scholarship money and financial support in order to do that. Obviously, there's going to be hits to the endowment and revenue and donations and things like that. But I think the students that are here were, I think, committed to make sure that they finish here and are able to do that. And I think each case will be a little bit specific, and we'll want to figure out if there are new barriers for students, what are those, and how can the university continue to support them in sort of overcoming those barriers. So I think that's sort of the 30,000 foot answer to the university's commitment to making sure our students stay here and can finish here, and that we continue to support them so that they can finish their education at the university.
In relation to funding, do you have any updates on summer internship funding? Like, is there the ability to help students with the remote internship opportunities that they might get?
Yeah, great question. I think we shifted our funding model a little bit. So some of you may know that we offer internship funding every summer for students to pursue internships across industry sectors around the world. So we decided this year to alter it a little bit and focus it primarily on virtual internships. We wanted to make sure we were taking real consideration about the health and safety of our students around the world. While we recognize some countries may be lifting bans and be returning to work, I think the important piece here is that we want to be consistent with the university's perspective as well as WHO, and we're going to fund all virtual internships, or at least fund the applications that we receive for virtual internships. And the other area is that we're moving some of our funding to support some of those skill development topics that I mentioned earlier. So if students are pursuing programs or things that are online to continue to build skills, we offer kind of mini grants that we're offering for students to be able to pursue those. So if there are program fees associated with pursuing some of those, although many have offered free access to different skill building, like the Adobe suite was opened up for a time for students to be able to take advantage of some of the courses that they have on there. We want to make sure that we're offering alternative options and support for students. So summer funding primarily focusing on virtual internships and skill building activities. We are not prioritizing in-person internships because we just don't know where those are going to be able to happen. And while things may be dissipating now, we might see a resurgence of COVID. And I think that we want to be careful not to put students in harm's way. So students are welcome to apply, but we're really not prioritizing a lot of in-person things, just to be consistent with, I think, the university's policies and university's recommendations, especially from the health system.
Thanks for the update, Joe.
No problem.
We have another question. So since budgets are tight, what are other things I can negotiate if I'm lucky enough to get an offer this summer?
Good question. What else can you negotiate? I think one thing that comes to mind is thinking about access. So will you be able to get access to maybe networking with different people within the organization, maybe sitting down with the CEO or sitting down with senior people to learn more about the organization? So how can you leverage the situation to expand your network within the organization itself? So you're building deeper networks with the hope of maybe securing a full-time offer or securing offer for the future. I think that's definitely something that if it's not built into the program, you should be asking about and negotiating and thinking about how that can be a piece of the program. I think the other thing to think about, it may not sound like a negotiation in the same way as salary, but what else can you do to help contribute to the organization's needs or their the way that they're addressing or responding to COVID or other challenges. So immersing yourself more in the organization, maybe outside of your department, might be a really great way, A, to continue to get more experience, B, to demonstrate your value to the organization, to once again, it's all about kind of maybe how you can secure future possible offers or really build or strengthen the network that you have. So I think those are definitely things to negotiate within that. And then maybe the last thing I would say that comes to mind, what's the potential for future internship, project-based work, or experiences that you might have later on? So will they extend maybe the internship into the fall if it's a virtual opportunity? Will they extend it all for the entire academic year? Can you secure some sort of support or experience for next summer, or an offer by a certain date? So I think those are questions that may not be the first questions to negotiate out the gate, but definitely parts of the conversation you should be having with these organizations. But I think the first two are kind of critical to possibly leading to the third option of negotiating longer term engagement, longer term employment, or lengthening the experience you might have with an organization.
Yeah, I think those are some really good ideas, and it gives everyone listening something to think about if they are given an offer.
Yeah.
So I'm watching the time. We have a couple minutes left, so if you have any last minute questions, please get those into the Q&A. But I figured we could hit this one. So do you anticipate delays or changes or even positive impacts in the application cycle for graduate programs?
Yeah, this one's a really fascinating one. I think so far, so I would split up between master's and PhD programs because I think there
Okay.
is a difference between how universities are thinking about the two. PhD programs, I don't think we anticipate any changes to the application cycles so far. I think many universities will evaluate and consider what's happening right now as part of the application process. So obviously, University U of R is going into a SF option for grades. So are plenty of other universities around the country. So I think that's going to be a factor in the evaluation of candidates. But I don't know if that's necessarily going to negatively because everyone's kind of experiencing the same thing on the academic side of things. And that might vary depending on the degree program. So there might be a little bit more or less leeway in medical school programs, maybe more leeway in law school programs. We're monitoring it. We're kind of checking in on this. We're trying to figure out what those impacts might be. But I think the short version of that is that they're cognizant and factoring in what's happening now academically with students into what those applications might be. I think one thing to pay attention to or think about for yourself, and this is a third tenet of our life design, is how are you telling your story? How are you effectively sharing or showcasing maybe how you've responded to this pandemic and how it's maybe impacted you individually? Has it impacted your family really badly and how you've had to be able to respond? Have you jumped on the front lines to support or help address this, whether it's volunteering somewhere or thinking critically, maybe creating a crowdsourcing campaign to support your local food bank? So I think how you've responded or how you participated in this might be part of your application and your story as you're looking at potential PhD programs down the line. Master's programs are a different ballgame. If I'm being honest, master's degrees tend to be revenue generators for universities and colleges. So in a recession, we typically see an uptick in master's and somewhat PhD programs, but definitely graduate school programs, applications overall. I don't think that'll be any different for this experience, for this time frame. So we might see an uptick in students applying for master's degrees, PhD programs that maybe they were going to put off for a couple of years. Maybe they're jumping into earlier than they anticipated. My important caveat on that one is think carefully before you jump into a master's degree program. I think the knee jerk is the economy is tanking. I'm just going to go get a master's degree. But I think you should take a pause there. Do you want to incur additional debt? What will be the value of that degree long-term or short-term? Is it something that you actually have an interest in as a continuation of your journey academically, but also your interests and your exploration? So those are important things to weigh into it. And I wouldn't necessarily run away from the job market because like I said, there may be rebounds, there may be opportunities. I don't think it hurts to apply for something, But I think we should weigh those options as to if you get accepted, whether or not they're good choices for you. And this is where I know I've been like talking about this a lot today, about this is where your community, your network, your relationships, the mentors, advisors you have are critical in helping you weigh whether or not these are good decisions to make and things you should jump into. But there will be ample master's programs at U of R and other places that you'll have access to that might be really good values, and also really great opportunities for you to continue your learning and maybe further your career long term. But I think that's a very individual choice, and you have to kind of weigh that in the grand scheme of things. And some of them I think might be very applicable to addressing the crisis right now, and others might be sort of long-term credentials that really will benefit you. But it's going to depend on the industry sector, your own interest levels, your ability to jump into those kinds of programs. But the the master's and PhD landscapes are going to be very fascinating to watch as they evolve over the next few months. But definitely lean on advisors, whoever they might be, to help you navigate that, because I think it's a big commitment and a big undertaking to pursue those kinds of degrees, and I think you should weigh that carefully.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely hear what you're saying. And I think it's so important that as an individual who might consider that, to really just take the time to digest
Yeah.
what the program is and figure out if it's something that even interests you or if you're just doing it just to do. All great things, Joe. Thank you for sharing. So we do have a question that's asking, so obviously, as you can see in the corner, this is being recorded and they would like to know where they can watch this later.
Yeah.
So in the chat box for those who have joined us today, I have linked to our COVID-19 response page, which has been built out pretty well with a bunch of new resources. And to be honest, we're adding stuff almost literally every day to this page. And we will be adding in the next couple of days some more video resources, including this AMA, the AMA we did last week, along with other webinars and workshops that we are creating in the midst of developing. So stay tuned for those. And I did want to mention that we also have this on our YouTube page. And I can share that link in the channel as well so you can see it. One second, multitasking. There you go. Okay, so it's on our YouTube as well, and you'll see that by the end of the week. So I hope that answers your question. We have amazing resources out there, and we hope that they're helpful. All right, so we have 3 minutes left, Joe. Is there anything on the top of your mind that you want to discuss before we part ways?
No, I think we had some really good topics this week. I think there's a lot of things that are fluid and changing. So Danae and I are doing these weekly for the next month, and we may continue them into the summer. We're going to kind of evaluate what we're hearing from students. But if students or other people that are on these have other suggestions and ideas for questions and topics or resources that we should be developing, we see this as an opportunity to kind of bring our ecosystem together to figure out what the best ways to support all the stakeholders we have, whether it's faculty, students, alumni, whatever it might be. So I think it's important that we continue to work together to figure out the best way forward as a community. So I think we'll continue to do these. We'll continue to pump out resources, as Danae mentioned, that really we hope are responding to the needs that students are having across the institution. So we'll continue to work on that to support you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And thank
No
you everyone who tuned in. Thank you for your questions. This was awesome. Keep the questions coming. Like Joe said, we're doing these weekly. So we hope to see you next week. All right. Well, have a great Wednesday, everybody.
Take care. See you next week. Stay healthy.
Bye.